My name is Adam, and I am 30 years old. And today, I speak a truth I once buried deep inside my chest. I grew up in a devout Muslim household where duty wrapped itself around my life like an unbreakable chain. My earliest memories are not of toys or cartoons, but of the low echo of my father's voice reciting verses before dawn, the cold tile floor under my feet as I hurried to wash for prayer, and the quiet disappointment in the room whenever I hesitated. I wanted to be a good son, the kind who never questioned, never doubted, never slowed down long enough for anyone to see the confusion behind my eyes. I memorized verses before I truly understood the meaning of the words, and each time I stumbled, the teacher's stick tapped my knuckles, not enough to injure, but enough to warn. Over time, I learned to fear mistakes more than sin itself, because mistakes brought shame, and shame was the one thing our home could not tolerate. At night, I would lie awake in my small room, tracing the cracks in the ceiling with my eyes, whispering questions I never dared to speak during the day. I asked if Allah saw me, if He heard me, if He cared that I felt hollow, even when I obeyed everything I was told to do. Silence greeted me every time, and I convinced myself that silence was normal. As I grew older, I became better at pretending. I prayed the way everyone expected, fasted with determination, and wore the expression of devotion that made my parents proud. But inside, I carried an emptiness I could never shake, a quiet ache that lived somewhere behind my ribs. I watched other boys laugh freely, talk freely, live freely, while I swallowed my thoughts whole. My father's words echoed constantly, telling me that doubt was a dangerous whisper, that questioning was a sign of weakness, and that obedience proved the strength of my faith. I tried to force myself into that mold, shaping my heart into something rigid and unfeeling, but some part of me always resisted. I wanted to feel God, not only fear Him, yet it seemed impossible to admit such a desire out loud. So I built walls around every restless thought, hiding them behind a mask even I began to believe. Yet beneath the surface, cracks formed little by little, and I felt myself slowly unraveling. I did not know then that a single moment was coming, a moment so heavy and sharp, it would tear those walls apart and force me to confront everything I had avoided for years. Before I share that moment, I want to gently ask anyone listening to support this testimony by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing, because stories like this reach people who are silently fighting battles they cannot name. What happened next was the beginning of the unraveling, the breaking point that opened a path I never imagined walking. And yet, even in those moments of fear and desperation, I felt something stirring inside me, something small and silent, waiting to be acknowledged today. The day everything broke began like any other. But even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel the weight of it pressing against my chest. I remember waking early, the sky still dark, the faint smell of tea drifting from the kitchen. I had plans to meet my closest friend, Youssef, someone who had been like a brother to me since childhood. We talked about everything: dreams, fears, the pressures of being the good Muslim sons our families expected. I thought he understood me better than anyone, but that morning, he didn't answer my calls. By midday, I learned why. His cousin arrived at our house, face pale, voice shaking as he said Youssef had collapsed at the mosque. One moment he was performing wudu, the next he was on the ground, breath fading. By the time they reached the hospital, he was gone. Just like that. No warning, no goodbye, A piece of my world simply vanished. I walked outside to escape the tightness in my chest, but the streets blurred. I tried to pray the way I was taught, repeating familiar words mechanically, but each syllable felt empty. I begged Allah for clarity, for comfort, for something, anything that could make sense of the sudden fracture in my life. But all I met was silence, a silence so deep it felt like a physical blow. That night, I visited the mosque alone. The imam was standing with a group of elders, talking about Yusef's death. But instead of mourning him, they spoke about how death was a reminder to fear Allah more, to obey more strictly, to avoid sin because punishment could come suddenly. Their voices felt cold, as if my friend were an object lesson instead of a life that mattered. One of them even suggested that maybe Yusef wasn't sincere enough in his prayers, that perhaps Allah was warning the rest of us. The words cut me. I felt anger twist inside me in a way I had never felt before. Yusef was one of the most sincere people I knew. How could his death become an opportunity for guilt and fear? I waited for someone to speak compassion, to speak mercy, to acknowledge the pain swallowing me whole. But no one did. Not one person spoke of love, or comfort, or hope. They spoke only of fear. And standing there, listening to them talk about my best friend as if he were a cautionary tale, something inside me snapped. When I left the mosque, the air was heavy and humid, sticking to my skin. I walked without direction, replaying every moment I had shared with Yusef. His laughter, his questions about life, his secret fear that he wasn't enough for God. We both carried that fear, though neither of us dared to admit it. I sat on a curb, my legs shaking, and whispered into the night, Allah, why? It wasn't a rebellious question. It was a cry from a heart unable to carry one more ounce of pain. But again, the silence answered me. I tried to fast more, pray more, read more, hoping something would shift. But the more I pushed, the farther God seemed to feel. The emptiness I had carried for years widened into something vast and terrifying. I looked at the sky and felt utterly alone, even though I was doing everything I had been taught to do. That night became the first time a forbidden thought slipped into my mind. So quiet, I almost missed it. Why does God feel so far away? I didn't know it then, but that question would become the doorway to everything that came next. Something changed in me after Yusef died. It was subtle at first, like a tiny crack running along the surface of a glass. But day by day, the crack deepened. I found myself waking up before Fajr not out of devotion, but out of restlessness. I would sit on the edge of my bed, hands clasped, staring at the prayer mat on the floor, wondering why the sight of it no longer brought any sense of comfort. I still prayed. I still went through every motion. But inside, something was slipping. I started searching for answers quietly, the way a starving man searches for crumbs without letting anyone see his desperation. I opened Islamic websites, watched lectures, listened to scholars explain the nature of suffering. But no matter how many explanations I consumed, none of them touched the ache inside me. Everything felt distant, surface level, almost rehearsed, and I kept hearing the same message. Do more, fear more, obey more. But I was already doing everything. Why didn't it feel like God saw me? One night, I typed into my phone, "What does Allah feel about people who are hurting?" The answers were cold. Obey, submit, fear, fear, fear. I tried another question, this time more dangerous. Can God love me? That word, love, felt forbidden. I realized I had never actually felt loved by God. Feared, yes. Controlled, yes. Expected, yes. But loved? I couldn't recall a single moment where I felt warmth or closeness or a father's tenderness. Instead of easing my confusion, my searches led me deeper into it. I saw contradictions, harsh commands, punishments that made my heart tighten. The more I read, the more it felt like a place I didn't belong. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. My hunger for truth had finally become louder than my fear of being wrong. One evening, while scrolling through videos, I accidentally clicked on something unexpected, a Christian testimony. I almost backed out immediately. Everything in me said it was haram, forbidden, dangerous. But something in the man's eyes stopped me. He looked free, not proud, not rebellious, just free. He spoke about God with a softness I'd never heard before, like he knew him personally, like God wasn't distant or angry but present, like a father. I told myself it was nonsense, propaganda, emotional manipulation. I shut the video off. But that image, those eyes full of peace, followed me into my dreams. Over the next week, I stumbled across more testimonies, former Muslims, former atheists, people who had searched endlessly for God and found him in a place I had been trained my entire life to avoid. I told myself to ignore it, but something kept echoing in my mind. What if they found something real? One night, exhausted from the weight of questions I couldn't silence, I fell asleep without realizing it. And that was when I saw him. A man, covered in blinding white light. Not harsh, not terrifying, gentle, radiant, like standing near a warm fire after years of shivering. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just looked at me. And in his presence, I felt something I had never felt before in my entire life. Peace, not fear, not pressure. Peace. I woke up with tears on my face, my heart beating in slow, heavy pulses. I told myself it was a dream, just a dream. But as I tried to fall back asleep, one thought kept circling in my mind, impossible to ignore. Who was that man in white? The question clung to me like a shadow, whispering at the edges of my thoughts. I didn't know it yet, but that dream would become the thread that pulled me toward a truth I had never dared to imagine. She woke before dawn, startled by a dream in which her own voice echoed through endless corridors, calling for a freedom she had never dared to name. Rising from her bed, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the balcony where the desert wind carried the first pale hints of morning. Everything looked unchanged. The guarded gates, the towering domes, the perfectly arranged gardens. But inside her, something had tilted permanently. She kept replaying the moment she read the forbidden words, their tenderness settling into the bruised spaces of her heart like a balm she never knew she needed. Fear still throbbed under her ribs, yet it struggled now against a strange courage beginning to take root. At breakfast, her father studied her with the sharpness of a man accustomed to absolute obedience, and she lowered her gaze, terrified he could read the rebellion forming behind her eyes. Her mother asked perfunctory questions about her sleep, unaware of the storm gathering beneath her daughter's composed surface. She answered softly, hiding the tremor in her voice, but the Bible's message pulsed in her memory. Love stronger than fear. Truth stronger than command. Later, she slipped away to the quietest corner of the palace library, pretending to search for poetry, while her mind clung desperately to the illumination she had tasted. She felt watched, followed by an invisible current of suspicion, yet she could not shake the yearning to return to the scripture that had awakened something sacred. The palace, once her universe, felt suddenly like a gilded cage she had mistaken for belonging. As she pressed her hand against her chest, she felt the fragile but undeniable beat of transformation, as if a door inside her had opened and refused to close again. She sensed destiny quietly reshaping her path. She moved through the palace that evening as if wrapped in a thin veil of glass, aware that the smallest touch could shatter her calm. Servants bowed, guards saluted, familiar rituals unfolded around her, yet everything felt unbearably loud, every gesture sharpened by the secret burning inside her. She tried to steady her breath, but her pulse betrayed her, quick and restless, whispering that the walls were drawing closer. At dinner, her father announced new restrictions for the women of the household, decrees spoken casually but weighted like chains, and something inside her cracked with a quiet, dangerous finality. She felt the room spinning, the chandeliers blazing too brightly, the polished silver catching reflections she no longer recognized. When she excused herself, she could feel eyes tracking her steps down the long corridor. But she kept walking, refusing to let fear drag her backward. In her chamber, she locked the door and pressed her forehead against the cool wood, wishing it could absorb her trembling. The Bible lay hidden beneath folded scarves, and when she touched it, warmth surged through her palms as if it were alive. She didn't open it. She simply held it, feeling its steady assurance echo the courage she was terrified to claim. She stood at the window, long after night settled, staring at the moon as if it held answers she was finally brave enough to seek. The palace grounds were quiet, except for distant footsteps of patrolling guards, their movements steady, predictable, suffocating. She pressed her fingers against the glass, imagining what life felt like beyond its cold surface. Life without fear, without scripted obedience, without the constant dread of disappointing a father whose love had always been a weapon. A soft knock made her freeze, breath caught in her throat. But when she opened the door, it was only her maid, a timid girl who had served her for years. The girl glanced at the trembling in her hands and asked if she was unwell. She wanted to lie, to dismiss the concern, yet something in the girl's gentle eyes pulled her guard down. She whispered that she was simply tired, and the girl nodded, placing a warm cloth on her table before slipping out. The moment the door closed, the weight of her secret pressed harder, reminding her she was crossing lines that could never be uncrossed. She reached for the hidden Bible and opened it to the page that first broke her heart open, letting the words wash through her like a promise she no longer wanted to resist. She woke before sunrise the next day with the unsettling sense that the world around her had shifted again, as if unseen hands were rearranging the pieces of her fate while she slept. The air felt heavy, charged with a warning she could not name, and for a moment, she lay still, listening to her own heartbeat racing like a frightened animal. When she finally rose, she moved quietly through her room, hiding the Bible deeper beneath layers of silk, as though fabric alone could shield her from discovery. At breakfast, she noticed two unfamiliar guards positioned near the entrance hall, their eyes sharp, their posture rigid, and a cold spark of fear ignited low in her stomach. Her father seemed distracted, speaking in clipped tones with an advisor whose expression never softened, and she sensed their conversation carried her name like a curse. She felt herself shrinking into her seat, trying not to draw attention, but dread settled in her bones with relentless certainty. Later, as she walked through the courtyard, a servant hurried past and accidentally dropped a folded note at her feet. When she opened it, her breath hitched. Inside, Written in trembling script were the words, "Be careful, they are watching you." Her fingers shook as she tucked the warning into her sleeve, the world suddenly sharper, darker, and unbearably fragile around her. She spent the next days moving like a shadow within her own home, every step measured, every breath controlled. As if noise alone could betray the storm that churned inside her, the warning note haunted her waking thoughts, replaying over and over until it carved fear into her ribs. She noticed how conversations hushed whenever she entered a room, how her mother's eyes lingered on her a little too long, how relatives whispered with tightened jaws as if discussing a shame too delicate to name. She felt increasingly unsafe, yet oddly more determined, as though danger itself was pushing her toward a truth she could no longer deny. One evening, while pretending to study, she opened the Bible again, its pages glowing faintly in the soft lamplight. As she read, warmth spread through her chest, steady and gentle, drowning out the tremor of fear that had followed her for days. The words felt alive, as though someone unseen sat beside her, speaking directly to the fractures within her soul. But just as peace began to settle, footsteps approached her door. Slow, heavy, intentional. She quickly hid the Bible, forcing calm into her voice as she responded. The door creaked open, revealing her older brother, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He stepped inside without asking permission, his eyes scanning the room with unsettling precision. And in that moment, she knew something irreversible was about to unfold. He closed the door behind him with a softness that felt more threatening than a slam, and she sat perfectly still, her heartbeat thundering loud enough she feared he could hear it. He walked around her room without speaking, brushing his fingers over her desk, her books, the edge of her pillow, each motion deliberate, testing, searching. When he finally turned toward her, his eyes held a depth of disappointment so sharp it sliced through her resolve. He asked where she had been disappearing to, why she seemed different, why servants had reported her wandering at odd hours, and she scrambled for excuses that sounded weak even to her own ears. He stepped closer and tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze, and murmured that rumors were spreading. Rumors of forbidden teachings, strange behaviors, betrayal. Panic clawed at her throat, but she managed to keep her expression still, offering half-truths that only made his suspicion thicken. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice to a whisper that chilled her blood, telling her their father had ordered the guards to watch her, that something sacred was slipping from her hands, and that if she was hiding anything, this was her final chance to confess. The message from my father sat on my screen like a wound that refused to close, a short string of words heavy enough to crush the air out of my lungs. You are no longer my son. Do not come back. I read it once, twice, 10 times, until the letters blurred and the meaning carved itself so deeply into me that I could no longer tell whether the burn in my chest was grief or release. I sank to the floor of the small room the church had given me for the night, my knees pressing into the thin rug. And for a moment, I didn't cry. I just breathed, slow and stunned, like someone waking up after drowning. Then, without warning, tears flooded out of me in a way I had never let myself cry as a Muslim man, not in front of family, not in prayer, not in secret. I cried for the boy who tried so hard to please everyone. I cried for the son who memorized verses he didn't understand. I cried for the young man who begged God for peace and found only fear. But underneath all that breaking, something steady rose, something like freedom. When the tears finally slowed, I whispered into the quiet room, "Lord Jesus, I'm yours, no matter the cost." The words felt like stepping into sunlight after a lifetime underground. In the morning, the pastor drove me to a small stream outside the city. The air was cool, the water clear, and a few church members stood waiting with gentle smiles that felt impossibly warm. I kept looking around, half expecting someone to shout my name, to drag me back home, to punish me for daring to choose a new life. But no one came. Only the sound of rushing water and the pastor's voice asking, "Are you ready?" I nodded, trembling. He placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Buried with him in death, raised with him into new life." When I went under, the water wrapped around me like a quiet grave, and for a heartbeat I felt weightless, suspended between who I had been and who I was becoming. When I rose again, the sunlight hit my face, and I gasped, because I didn't just feel wet, I felt clean, really clean. For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing faith. I wasn't obeying out of fear. I wasn't pretending. I was free. I spent the next weeks learning to live like someone who belonged somewhere new. The church became my family. People who hugged me without suspicion, who prayed with me without judgment, who listened to my questions without anger. They gave me a job, a place to stay, and a circle of friends who saw me not as a traitor, not as a disappointment, but as a brother. I started reading the Bible openly now, no longer hiding behind locked doors or dim screens. The words felt alive, sharp, and comforting all at once. Every page seemed to speak directly to the ache inside me. "I have called you by name. You are mine." That verse stayed with me, like Jesus himself was whispering it in the quiet moments when fear tried to creep back in. One Sunday, the pastor asked if I would share my testimony at church. My heart pounded, but something inside urged me forward. So I stood before the congregation, my hands shaking, and told my story, from the dreams to the fear to the night I ran away with nothing but a phone and a desperate hope. As I spoke, I realized something. I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't running anymore. I was finally standing in the truth. And now, as I share this story with you, I want to say this with all the love I have found. If you are searching, if you are questioning, if you feel that gentle pull in your heart, don't ignore it. Truth doesn't vanish when you chase it. Real love doesn't punish you for seeking it. I found freedom the day I found Jesus. And if this testimony touched you, please share it. Someone out there is praying for hope, just like I once did. Let this story reach them. Let light find them the way it found me.